Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Lena Carter's world collapsed when her husband, Richard Matthews, chose his mistress, Isabella Vance, over her at a glamorous gala. After being humiliated and left to drown in the ocean, Lena survived, setting the stage for her revenge. With the help of Fernando Ortega, Lena uncovered Richard's deceit and rebuilt her life, transforming from a discarded wife into a woman of power. This is the story of Lena's rise from betrayal to triumph, showing that true strength lies in healing, not destruction. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. A message from the editorial team. If this video sends a chill down your spine, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to stay on top of our ongoing saga of vengeance, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's dive into this tale. The rescue that never truly came. The night was alive with the sparkle of champagne flutes, camera flashes, and the pulsating beat of Marbella's elite. The annual gala aboard the Matthews Foundation's yacht was an extravagant celebration of wealth, sailing gracefully over the choppy waters of the Mediterranean. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and the unmistakable fragrance of expensive perfume. Laughter rang out on the deck like music from a different world. A world where appearances mattered more than loyalty. Lena Carter stood on the edge of this world, her hand instinctively resting on her 6-month pregnant belly, dressed in a pale silk gown that shimmered like moonlight. She appeared delicate yet radiant, her almond-shaped eyes scanning the crowd for the one person she believed she could trust. Her husband, Richard Matthews. But Richard wasn't by her side. The renowned real estate mogul had become the center of attention, his arm possessively wrapped around Isabella Vance, his young assistant. Isabella, glowing in a deep crimson dress that hugged her every curve, laughed loudly, tossing her hair back too confidently. Richard leaned in close, whispering in her ear, making her blush. Every flash from the paparazzi seemed to capture them as the perfect couple, as if Lena's very presence didn't exist. Lena's heart sank. She had convinced herself that the rumors were just exaggerated gossip, born from jealousy. But tonight the truth was undeniable. Surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the gaze of hundreds of guests, her throat tightened, but she lifted her chin, unwilling to let them see her crumble. As the yacht drifted further from the shore, the city lights fading into the distance, the music grew louder, blending with the rhythm of the waves. Waiters weaved through the crowd offering drinks. A toast was raised to Richard, and Isabella clinked her glass against his, flashing a smug smile as if she had already claimed victory. Tonight isn't just about wealth. Richard's voice boomed across the deck, amplified by the microphone. It's about vision. It's about building futures. He paused, deliberately squeezing Isabella's hand, and about those who stand with us as we pursue our dreams. The crowd cheered. Lena felt an emptiness inside her. She was the wife carrying his child, but here he was, publicly crowning another woman as his partner. The deck tilted slightly as the waves grew stronger, and guests swayed, oblivious to the change in the wind. The sea below roared, darker than velvet, more dangerous than any secret shared that night. Lena stepped back cautiously, the sound of her heels echoing on the polished wood. Her vision blurred, either from the dizziness of pregnancy or the tears threatening to fall. She wasn't sure. Gripping the railing, she struggled to catch her breath, and then chaos erupted. A sharp crack sliced through the night, the sound of a champagne bottle shattering on the deck. A startled guest collided with Isabella, who screamed as her heels splintered against the wooden floor. In a panic-fueled blur, Isabella toppled backward over the railing. The crowd gasped, but Lena, already unsteady, was too close. The sudden movement sent her off balance as another guest slammed into her shoulder. She lurched forward, and before she could scream, she too was falling. Two women, one carrying an unborn child, the other fueled by ambition, tumbled into the cold Atlantic. Time seemed to slow. The music cut off and glasses shattered on the deck as people screamed. The freezing water swallowed Lena, pulling the air from her lungs, wrapping her in darkness. Salt water burned her throat as she gasped for breath. She surfaced once, choking, clutching her belly instinctively, letting out a scream that was lost to the waves. Richard. Above her, the chaos continued. People rushed to the railing. Spotlights swung wildly, cutting through the waves. And then she saw him. Richard, her husband, her protector, the man who had promised to love her through sickness and health until death parted them. He leaned over the railing toward Isabella, his eyes fixed on his mistress, who was thrashing in the water, screaming for help. Without a second thought, he threw off his tuxedo jacket and jumped, not for his wife, not for the mother of his child, but for Isabella. The ocean roared, as if it too understood the betrayal. Lena's world shattered as she struggled to stay afloat. Her limbs grew numb, each kick weaker than the last. She tried to scream again, but salt water filled her mouth. Her silk gown tangled around her legs, dragging her deeper. She saw flashes. Richard wrapping his arm around Isabella, lifting her as though she were the damsel in a romance novel. Guests cheered in relief, cameras flashing. Lena's voice, desperate and hoarse, was drowned by the applause. She slipped under the surface, the coldness piercing her body. The weight of the betrayal felt heavier than the sea itself. Not the baby, please. Not the baby, she thought, her body growing heavier with each passing second. The last sound she heard was Isabella's sobbing, her voice trembling against Richard's chest as he whispered, "I've got you. You're safe now." Not a word for his wife. The Atlantic consumed Lena, taking her beneath its waves. On the glittering deck, under the dazzling chandeliers, the woman carrying his child, his legacy was forgotten. But fate hadn't finished with Richard Matthews. His choice wouldn't fade with the night. It would return, sharpened, unforgiving, and unforgettable, because what he allowed to drown would one day rise. And when it did, she would return not as the fragile wife he had discarded, but as the storm he could never escape. That's why when the Atlantic swallowed both women, his instincts were not to save the mother of his unborn child, but to rescue Isabella, the woman who made him feel invincible. The cameras captured him grabbing Isabella like a hero, his soaked shirt clinging to his muscles while Lena sank into the darkness. To the crowd, it was shocking. To Richard, it was natural. He had already chosen the future he wanted, and it was not the one he had with his wife. But what neither Richard nor Isabella understood was that their arrogance had set a stage larger than themselves. The gala guests had seen. The investors had whispered. The cameras had clicked. In trying to show his power, Richard had revealed his cruelty. In trying to flaunt her victory, Isabella had exposed her shamelessness. They thought they were untouchable. But reputations, like empires, can crumble overnight. In the days that followed, Richard held firm. He visited Lena in the hospital, not out of love, but to control the narrative. "Stay quiet," he warned her. His tone more like a CEO addressing a problem than a husband speaking to a grieving wife. "If it gets out that I left you, it will ruin everything. Think of the company. Think of the headlines." Isabella, meanwhile, reveled in the chaos. She played the victim in whispers to the press, feigning that the fall had traumatized her. Painting Richard as her savior, she knew that sympathy would only secure her place at his side. Her crocodile tears, her trembling hands, every performance tightened her grip on him. To the outside world, they appeared unified, powerful, untouchable. But behind closed doors, their foundation was already cracking. Because while Richard and Isabella conspired, they underestimated the woman they had discarded. They thought Lena's silence meant defeat. They thought her grief would chain her forever. They thought the ocean had broken her. They were wrong. Even as Richard reveled in false applause and Isabella sharpened her claws, another force was stirring quietly in the shadows. Fernando Ortega, the man they had barely noticed, had seen it all. And unlike the crowd, he would not forget. Richard Matthews and Isabella Vance believed they had buried Lena Carter, but in truth they had forged her, and when she rose, it would be their empire that would drown. Theory 3. Do you think Isabella's manipulation was the key to Richard's success, or just a part of his downfall? Theory 4. Is it possible that the tragedy on the yacht was a necessary evil for Lena to find her true strength? Leave your opinion in the comment section. The rise of the forgotten queen. The old Lena Carter drowned the night Richard Matthews jumped into the water for another woman. The fragile wife, the grieving mother, the invisible figure in her husband's empire. She was gone. What rose from those ashes was someone different, someone sharper, someone who no longer asked for love but demanded respect. It began in silence. After Fernando's visit, the documents he left sat on the library table like silent weapons. Each page exposed Richard's deception, hidden accounts, offshore transfers, fraudulent contracts. For 2 days, Lena stared at them, fear battling fury. But the more she studied the evidence, the more her grief twisted into purpose. If Richard thought she would be erased, he was wrong. On the third morning, she opened the drapes of the house for the first time in weeks. Sunlight streamed in, blinding at first, but warm, alive. She saw her reflection in the window, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes. A ghost. She didn't recognize herself, and that realization hurt her more deeply than any headline. She whispered to the silence, "No more." The first step was her appearance. For years, Richard had dictated how she dressed. Soft colors, conservative cuts, dresses that made her a background ornament. Lena drove herself to Serrano Street, ignoring the paparazzi swarming around her car. Inside a high-end boutique, she faced the mirror as a stylist draped her in a tight black dress with sharp lines that hugged her body. She let her hair fall in loose waves instead of the pulled-back bun Richard always demanded. Red lipstick, bold and unapologetic, stained her mouth. When she looked again, she didn't see the forgotten wife. She saw a woman stepping into her own spotlight. The next step was to reclaim her voice. Fernando arranged a discreet meeting at one of his private offices downtown. Inside the glass tower overlooking the city, Lena spread Richard's documents on the table. Fernando watched as she moved with a new focus, her fingers tracing numbers, her mind sharp. "He thinks I don't understand finance," she said, her voice firm. "He always told me to leave the business to him. But now I see. Every lie, every transfer." Fernando's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. Because knowledge is power, Lena, and you have enough to destroy him." She lifted her chin, a spark igniting in her eyes. "Then let's make sure he never sees it coming." But the transformation wasn't just a strategy. It was about reclaiming her life. One night, Lena returned to her piano. For weeks, it had been silent. A coffin for the music that once defined her. She sat on the bench, her hands trembling, then pressed a single key. The note resonated, fragile but pure. She pressed another and another. Soon the room was filled with a melody, haunting, broken, but alive. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't just from grief. They were from rebirth. Fernando, listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten. The girl he once knew was returning, but now she was different, stronger, forged by fire. The news of her change spread quietly. When the paparazzi captured her leaving a boutique in that sharp black dress, the headlines shifted from tragedy to triumph. Lorena Carter debuts a dazzling new look. Is Richard Matthews' wife preparing for a comeback? The public sympathy that once painted her as pitiful now began to turn into admiration. The narrative was changing, and Richard had no control over it. Meanwhile, Richard was spiraling. His stocks continued to fall. Investors whispered doubts, and Isabella, though still at his side, grew restive. She hadn't expected Lena to survive, much less to rise from humiliation with a power that threatened them both. One night, Richard confronted Lena at the house, bursting into the library, his eyes aflame, Isabella trailing behind in a silk robe. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" He spat, slamming a magazine on the table. On the cover was Lena in her new dress, walking with her head held high, Fernando discreetly at her side. "You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing this family." Lena looked up calmly from her papers. "What family, Richard?" The words cut sharper than knives. Isabella sneered, stepping forward. "You think a dress and a little makeup make you powerful? You're still the woman he left in the water." Lena stood up slowly, her gaze locked with Isabella's with an unblinking fire. "Yes, he left me and I survived. But do you know what survival does, Isabella? It makes you fearless, and you?" She let her eyes sweep over Isabella's trembling body. "You are nothing without him." For the first time, Isabella faltered. Her smile cracked. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Don't test me, Lena, you'll lose." But Lena didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her voice low but lethal. "I already lost everything, Richard. You can't break someone who has already been broken. And that makes me more dangerous than you will ever be." The silence was heavy. Richard's jaw was tight. But beneath his fury was something else. Fear. That night, as he stormed out with Isabella clinging to his arm, Fernando emerged from the shadows of the library. "You didn't just stand up to him," he said softly. "You declared war." Lena exhaled, her hands trembling but her ease firm. "Good, let it come. I'm ready." The transformation was complete. She was no longer Richard Matthews' silent wife. She was Lena Carter, reborn, relentless and ready to reclaim everything they had stolen. Thesity that once pied her now awaited her next move. The empire that had tried to raise her now trembled at her return. And Richard Matthews, the man who thought he had buried her, would soon realize the truth. He hadn't drowned Lena Carter. He had awakened her. Conclusion. Do you think Lena's vengeance will be as satisfying as her personal rebirth? The last stand of a fallen king. The night of the winter charity gala arrived like a storm wrapped in glitter. The ballroom of Madrid's Ritz Hotel sparkled under cascading crystal chandeliers, every inch dripping with wealth and vanity. The city's elite packed the room, their diamonds flashing, their conversations a chorus of ambition. It was the kind of event Richard Matthews lived for, a chance to display power, to remind the world he was untouchable. But tonight, the stage he built would become his ruin. Richard entered with Isabella Vance clinging to his arm, her crimson dress echoing the night of the yacht. The cameras devoured them. To the press, they were still the scandalous couple, the pair who dared to flaunt a love born of betrayal. Richard thrived on it, smiling broadly, waving as if he had conquered the headlines instead of drowning in them. Isabella leaned in, whispering, sweet nothings crafted more for the audience than for him. However, in the crowd, the whispers had changed. Have you seen her? A woman murmured to her date. She's here tonight. Lena Carter, Thayman replied, his eyes wide. Yes, and she looks different. The air grew tense with anticipation. Every scandal-hungry guest craned their neck toward the grand staircase, and then she appeared. Lena descended slowly, each step deliberate. Her dress was a cascade of black silk with threads of silver that shone like starlight. Her hair framed her face in soft waves. Her lips painted a fierce crimson. The woman they once pied was gone. In her place stood a vision of strength, beauty, and unblinking resolve. The cameras flashed wildly. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Richard froze. His smug smile faltered, his jaw tightened. For the first time in months, he looked rattled. Isabella's hand on his arm grew rigid. Lena reached the last step and paused, letting the silence envelop her. She lifted her chin, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing directly on Richard. A faint smile touched her lips, not warm, not forgiving, but sharp as a blade. Fernando Ortega came to her side, dressed in a midnight blue suit that radiated a quiet authority. He offered her his arm, and Lena took it. Together they walked into the lion's den, two figures who owned the room without the need for words. The whispers grew louder. Is she with Fernando Ortega, the billionaire? Oh, this is war. Richard clenched his fists. His empire was already cracking, his investors questioning his judgment. Now to see his wife, no. His ex-wife in all but papers standing radiant beside his biggest business rival was a humiliation he had not calculated. The night unfolded with a brilliant excess. Wine flowed, violins played, speeches were droning, but the tension mounted with every passing minute. Everyone was waiting for the collision, which they knew was inevitable. It came when the host called Richard to the stage. He rose with confidence, dragging Isabella with him, and adjusted the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, his polished voice began. Tonight is about generosity, about building futures. How rich. Lena's voice rang clear across the hall, cutting through the applause. You speak of building futures when you destroyed mine. The room stopped, cameras swiveled. Flashes erupted. Richard froze, his grip tightening on the podium. Lorena hissed through clenched teeth. Sit down. But she didn't. She stepped forward, Fernando at her side, and walked onto the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, eyes wide, hungry for blood. Lena faced the audience, her posture regal, her voice unwavering. Months ago, this man left me to drown while he saved another woman. He let me lose my child. He humiliated me in front of the world. And while you were all debating whether it was instinct or betrayal, he was transferring millions to offshore accounts, hiding assets, preparing to discard me completely. Gasps spread. Journalists scribbled furiously. Microphones were thrust closer. Fernando stepped forward, his voice calm but lethal. I have documents that prove it. Shell corporations in Isabella Vance's name. Fraudulent contracts, embezzlement masked as philanthropy. Richard Matthews' empire is not built on vision. It is built on deception. The ballroom erupted. Voices clashed. Flashes went off. Guests surged forward to catch every word. Richard's face went white. It's a lie. He roared, slamming his fist on the podium. She's bitter. She's don't you dare. Lena interrupted him sharply, her voice cutting through his fury. Don't you dare call me bitter for speaking the truth. You left me in the ocean, Richard. You left our child. You can deny your crimes, but you can't erase what the world saw. Isabella tried to step forward, her voice trembling. This is ridiculous. She's just Lena turned, her gaze pinning her like a dagger. You think wearing his arm makes you powerful? You are nothing more than a pawn. He will discard you the moment you stop being useful. Just like he tried to discard me. The words hit harder than any slap. Isabella's face crumpled, her mask of superiority cracking under the weight of the truth. Richard lunged at Lena, rage boiling, but Fernando moved instantly, intercepting him with a firm hand on his chest. The two men locked eyes, the silence thick with unspoken challenge. Richard faltered, not because he feared Fernando's strength, but because for the first time he saw that the room was not with him. The crowd was with her. Flashes blinded him. Journalists shouted questions. Guests murmured condemnation. Years of a carefully crafted reputation unraveled in minutes. The king had been dethroned, not in private, but under crystal chandeliers and cameras. Lena did not gloat. She didn't need to. She simply looked at Richard one last time, her eyes calm, her voice soft. But devastating. You thought you buried me, but all you did was set me free. She walked off the stage, Fernando's hand firm on her back. The ballroom erupted into chaos behind them. Journalists swarmed Richard, Isabella sobbing, investors storming out. But Lena walked forward unbowed with her head held high. Her vengeance was not a scream, not a fight. It was the truth revealed in the one place Richard valued most, public perception. And in that world he was finished. The woman he had left in the ocean had risen, and that night she drowned him instead. Epilogue. The triumph of truth. The fallout from the winter charity gala spread through the city like an earthquake. Overnight, Richard Matthews' empire crumbled. Investors pulled out, boards of directors resigned. Headlines went from admiration to condemnation. Matthews exposed Mistress, fraud, and betrayal. From mogul to monster, the public downfall of Richard Matthews, the video of the confrontation went viral. Millions of people watched as Lena Carter, once dismissed as fragile, stood tall before the cameras, her voice firm, her truth undeniable. In living rooms and offices across the country, people cheered her on. Mothers who had been abandoned, wives who had been betrayed, daughters who had been silenced saw themselves in her. Richard's attempts to defend himself only worsened the damage. Every denial was met with another leaked document, another piece of evidence. His lawyers scrambled, but the walls closed in fast. Federal investigators launched inquiries. Rumors of indictments grew louder. Isabella Vance, once smug in her stolen spotlight, found herself ostracized. Friends stopped returning her calls. Sponsors rescinded invitations. She had been Richard's trophy, and when his crown shattered, so did her status. Paparazzi captured her, leaving his penthouse in a screaming fit. With smeared mascara, she yelled. The woman who had mocked Lena had become a footnote in Richard's ruin. Meanwhile, Lena walked through the city with her head held high. For months she had hidden behind drapes, flinching at whispers. Now people stopped her in the street, not with pity but with respect. Some hugged her, others whispered, "Thank you." She realized she had become something more than a victim. She was a symbol, but the victory was not just about destroying Richard. It was about reclaiming herself. In the weeks after the gala, Fernando Ortega remained by her side, not as her savior but as heraldry. Together they met with lawyers, securing her rightful share of Richard's assets. With Fernando's guidance, she founded the Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting abandoned or silenced women, women who needed voices as fierce as hers. The foundation's first press conference washled in a modest hall, not a glittering ballroom. Lena stood at the podium, her black dress replaced with a simple navy suit, her hands firm on the wood. The flashes went off, microphones were thrust forward, but her voice rang clear. "This is not just my story," she said. "It belongs to every woman who has been left, discarded, forgotten. I lost a child. I lost a marriage. But I did not lose myself. And tonight, I tell every woman watching me, you don't have to drown. You can rise." And the applause was thunderous. That night, sitting alone in her apartment overlooking the city, Lena finally allowed herself to breathe. For so long, she had defined herself by the pain and betrayal. Now she felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Peace. However, there was one last chapter to close. Weeks later, she received a call from her lawyer. Richard had agreed to a meeting. He wanted to see her. Against her better judgment, she agreed. Not for reconciliation, There was none but for closure. The meeting took place in a sterile lawyer's office, the city skyline looming behind the tall windows. Richard sat across the table. His presence, once imposing, had dimmed. His hair was disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. For the first time in years, he looked small. "Lena," he began, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake," she almost laughed. "A mistake? No, drowning your wife, erasing her, stealing from her. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You didn't make a mistake, Richard," she said calmly. "You made hundreds and you chose them one after another." He flinched but continued. "I lost a very thing. The company, the money, Isabella, it's all gone. But you?" His eyes flickered, desperate. "You could still come back. We could start over." Lena leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Start over? You left me in the ocean. You let me lose our child. And then you paraded another woman through my grief. You think forgiveness erases that?" Richard swallowed. "I regret it every day." "Good," she replied simply. "Live with that regret because I don't regret leaving you." She stood up, sliding the divorce papers across the table. "This is the last time we speak. Goodbye, Richard." As she walked out, she felt lighter than she had in years. Behind her, Richard slumped, drowning now not in water but in the consequences of his own choices. Outside the building, Fernando was waiting for her. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. He simply offered her his arm and she took it. The weeks turned into months. The Carter Foundation flourished, helping countless women find their voices again. Lena filled her apartment with music once more, her piano resonating with strength rather than pain. She still grieved for her son, but she no longer carried the sorrow alone. One evening, Fernando invited her to a rooftop overlooking the city. The skyline glittered, the air cool with spring. He handed her a glass of wine, his eyes firm, his smile gentle. "You've built something incredible," he said, "not just the foundation, yourself." She looked at him, her heart steady for the first time in a long time. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You always had it in you, Larita. I just reminded you." The silence stretched between them, warm and unspoken. Then she whispered softly, "Maybe it's time I stopped surviving and started living." Fernando reached for her hand. "Then let's live." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Not for the cameras, not for survival, but for herself. The city lights glittered below, but they no longer felt like prisons of wealth and scandal. They felt like stars, guiding her toward a future she had reclaimed with her own strength. Richard Matthews faded into headlines of disgrace. Isabella Vance disappeared into obscurity. But Lena Carter rose higher than either of them had ever imagined. The woman who was left to drown not only survived, she built. She reclaimed, she rose. And her story closed not with loss, but with triumph, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, but healing. And Lena Carter had done both. That's how the story ends, my dear friends. And if you are still here with me, it means that something in Lena's journey touched your heart in a way words can barely explain. Perhaps it was the pain of betrayal. Perhaps it was the strength she found in the midst of despair. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That is exactly what this story reminds us of. Healing doesn't come from those who hurt us. It comes from the courage we choose to build within ourselves. No matter how low you have fallen, you can rise again.